Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's the new Pope on a rope. That's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bill Roach, and this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today, we are going to be answering one of the top questions people ask me. Namely, what are the top philosophy books that you should be reading? One of the reasons people ask me this is because on this channel, we are constantly dealing with issues related to philosophy and culture and politics and so much more. Moreover, it's because I teach philosophy at the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral level. And on a regular basis, people always come up and they want to have a greater understanding of the history of philosophy, or maybe you're a person who's in a class and you're looking up videos like this, trying to figure out which books should I actually be reading and which books should I not be reading. So what I want to do today is I want to provide a guide for you, a very quick guide, one that you can just watch this very quickly, get a big overview of what you're trying to do without much commentary so that you can take these books and use them in your personal life or in your academic life and so much more. But before we get to that, I want to give a special shout out to our sponsor. Well, here's the reality of it. We don't have a sponsor for this channel. And one of the reasons we don't have a sponsor for this channel is most likely because you haven't liked and subscribed to my channel. Please do so. I want to make videos that you like. I want to make videos that people are actually going to engage with. So if you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to this so that the analytics can build and so that we can get sponsors so that I can provide material for you. Shameless plug. I have no problem saying that. With no further ado, we're going to jump right into this. And the first thing that I want you to see is that I think if you're going to get into all of these different topics, you need to buy this series called The Great Books by Mortimer Adler. Now, what it is it's a 60-volume series of which he looks at things related to history, philosophy, science, literature, politics, and so much more. And one of the things that he tries to do with this is that you can even see it here. They're color-coded. These are all red. Why are they red? Because red in the Great Book series dictate philosophy. And there are different colors for the different disciplines. And why this is important is that Mortimer Adler is going to be your one-stop shop for all of the great literature that you need to be reading. Because one of the difficult things, and maybe one of the things that you're finding is that there's so much literature out there. You can't read everything. So you need to have somebody who knows the field well and can direct you in a particular way for the various books that you should be reading. Now, another thing before we dive into those is that there are 2 volumes that are given to us in the Great Book series that are called the Syntopicon, of which they look at 100 different issues. They look at the major discussions, topics, key figures, and here's one of the key things. It provides a full article and a bibliography, but it goes even further. It gives you the proper citation in the Great Book series so that you can then go and find the original quotes from the original authors on the key topics and how they relate to one another. So with that, the first book that I want you to look at here is he pulls up Plato. And with Plato, as I'm looking at this, I'm just going to scroll through it. It's actually going to help us go through this. He has various different dialogues. And what I would tell you to read is things like the Apology, the Credo, the Phaedo, and the Republic. There may be others with it that you would find helpful. But what I want you to see is that the history of Western philosophy is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato. They either accept him, reject him, modify him, or do something else with him. But the whole point is that the history of Western philosophy has to look at Plato. He's the most influential figure because people are looking at his theory of knowledge, his theory of reality, his theory of ethics, his theory of politics, and so much more. So if I had to pick all of those, I would actually say the most important work out of Plato is the Republic, because in the Republic, you find the culmination of all of those ideas coming together. Now, the second book that we're going to look at is you need to read Aristotle. Obviously, you have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But within Aristotle, what I would highly recommend is that if you're going to read anything from him, you need to read, in particular, 2 books. You need to read his Metaphysic, and you need to read Nicomachean Ethics. And we'll throw in a third, his Politics. But what's related to this is that you're going to see how Aristotle is truly a footnote on Plato, because with Plato, the forms are in this third place, this other place within Aristotle. He's going to say, no, they're in the things. In particular, you're going to remember that there's this historic painting about the differences. And you're going to see it's the School of Athens painting. And you're going to see Plato pointing up because the forms are somewhere else, whereas Aristotle is going to have his fingers spread and pointing down. The reason is that the forms are in the things. Now, the next thing that you're going to find of why Aristotle and Plato are so important is because they try to give us a systematic philosophy of life. And they do that by looking at both how politics and ethics relate. So Nicomachean Ethics is going to be a key book that you need to read to understand what is virtue ethics. What does it mean to live the virtuous life? What does it mean to live our life in this world of which we are striving to become better people, and how do habits form virtues and how do habits form vices in our life? So again, the three big topics, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and how those relate to politics are essential for you if you're going to be getting into this debate. Now, like I said, quick video, so we're going to shift right to the next one. So there has been a massive resurgence of people studying the Stoics. And what I would recommend that you do is that you read Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. The reason that you need to read them is that because they're the key Stoic philosophers. So what I would recommend is that you start out with Marcus Aurelius. You understand what he's going to mean by the Stoic life. Now, the Stoic life isn't necessarily just a full-blown philosophy. It's building off of the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. But what's going to be essential to it is that you're going to see the tactics that Marcus Aurelius, literally one of the most influential figures within the Roman Empire, had to give for day-to-day life. It's really going to be a book on how you should live your life. So, looking at this, if you're watching this, trying to look at how philosophy is going to affect my day-to-day life, I would tell you to read The Republic, because The Republic's going to give you a full discussion about ethics. Also, Nicomachean Ethics, for how you're going to see how you should live the good life. And Marcus Aurelius, his meditations are going to apply it in a much more tangible way. In fact, I think one of the reasons that Stoicism has just exploded with popularity all over the internet is because it's practically applicable to your life. It's not just abstract philosophy, it's very tangible ways that people are going to operate so that they can see how philosophy is going to benefit them. Now, the next book that I would recommend would be Augustine. Augustine is a medieval philosopher. He's a convert from paganism to Christianity. Augustine is probably the most influential theologian of the Western Church. But what we have to find is that during this time, the most influential philosophers were the Christian theologians, such as Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. But what I would recommend that you do is that if you get Augustine, I would prioritize two works in particular. You need to read his book on City of God, and you need to read the Confessions. The Confessions is his autobiography, where he's going to talk about how he left these different philosophical views, how he converted to Christianity, and the significance that makes in one's life. The reason that's important is that it's really the true first autobiography that's going to discuss these types of things. But he also interacts with all of the ancient philosophy and some of the precursors of early modern philosophy. And if you're trying to see how Christians interacted with this, or even just the Christian Western, society and academy deals with this, you have to look at Augustine. He's literally the most central figure on those matters. Now, the next book that I would recommend was City of God. What the City of God is looking at is that there are two cities, the city of man and the city of God, and how do they interact with one another? And what you're going to find is that he's writing this because you're starting to see people claiming that Christianity was the main reason for the fall of Rome. And what he's trying to do is provide answers to show that what you're seeing here is that the clash between good and evil, Christianity and the pagan religions, and you're going to see how he interacts in even significant more detail with those ancient historians and politicians and philosophers to show that history is not cyclical. It's moving towards its end goal. Again, that's a very brief overview. There's a lot more to it. But the point is that we want to give you quick resources so that you know exactly what you need to be reading. Now, the next one that we're going to look at here is another key medieval philosopher theologian. Namely, it's Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, in many respects, if you're going to look at the history of philosophy, is that he was the person who was significantly influenced by Aristotle. So Augustine, in many respects, was following Plato and Neoplatonists in this sense, but also you're going to see Aquinas was following Aristotle. And the big differences that we already talked about is that it's going to affect their metaphysic and their epistemology in very specific ways. But the point of this is that I think if you're going to read Aquinas, you need to read the Summa Theologicae. Now, what is the Summa Theologicae? Again, you have to learn how to say it in order for it to make any sense. It's his work where he's discussing issues related to faith and reason. And he's going to give you a whole series of articles of which he's going to look at something from the issue of how does reason appropriate this and how do the articles of faith look at this. Now, for Aquinas, faith is not just some abstract, non-rational, has nothing to do with your life sort of thing. Rather, what he's going to look at is that these are the issues of what have been revealed by God to us. So if you want to see how faith and reason interact and the key arguments for the existence of God and how human nature function and how ethics work, you need to read Thomas Aquinas. Another reason you need to read Aquinas is that he's also dealing with something that Augustine was not dealing with and many of the other individuals were not dealing with, namely the rise of Islamic philosophy and how they were recovering Aristotle, because Aquinas was an apologist. An apologist is somebody who's offering a defense. And one of the key defenses that he's trying to deal with is that both the Muslims and the Jews were picking up these various different philosophies to argue against Christianity. And you may be thinking, well, I am not a Christian. Why does this even matter? Well, it matters because they were the most significant intellectual minds of the universities of that time. And in many respects, they are another footnote on that long series of footnotes on Plato. Namely, you're giving an Aristotelian bent and you're seeing how these different major world religions are dealing with the history of ideas. Moreover, it's not just how the medievals are dealing with it. When you get to modern philosophy, you start to see how they reject the things that were taught by Augustine and Aquinas. But they weren't just rejecting Augustine and Aquinas. They were rejecting Plato and Aristotle and that deep philosophical bent that was so essential to ancient and medieval philosophy. Moving on, because this is a quick video. We're going to jump straight into what's going to be more of the modern context. And I would highly recommend that you read figures such as René Descartes and other rationalists and Francis Bacon, who was an empiricist. You might be asking yourself, what's a rationalist? What's an empiricist? Well, it all deals with this whole issue of what's the source and origin of knowledge? Does it come from my senses? Does it come from the external world? You would be an empiricist. Does it come from reason and does it come prior to experience? You would be a rationalist. Now, one of the key things that this whole debate brought about was people became either very rigid in their approach or they were looking for this inductive method. Bacon was giving us the inductive method. Descartes and the other rationalists gave us this philosophical certainty and this very almost cold approach to philosophy. So some people thought. Now, in response to that, one of the key books that I would recommend is Pascal, in particular, Pascal's Pensées, because what he's going to do is he's going to pick up the mood of that time, and he's going to really be a philosopher of the heart. He's not just denying that we can't have knowledge, or he's not going to say you can't know reality, but he's going to realize this, is that there's more to this world than just a hard, very rigid approach to philosophy. Namely, what he's going to do is he's going to humanize your philosophy. So, Pascal's Pensées, Descartes' Meditations, Francis Bacon, Novum Organum. Now, let's continue going through. The next thing that I would really look at is you need to see the people that were reacting to these figures. In particular, you have Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. And with Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, you're going to see these varying forms of how empiricism is going to function. Specifically, I would tell you to read Locke and Hume. Locke is not only going to give you key things related to epistemology, he's also going to give you this strong influence as it relates to natural law theory. Namely, how does this natural law concept relate to ethics and politics and so much more? But probably the more influential figure was David Hume, the Scottish skeptic. And Hume was the person that gave us the whole philosophy for skepticism. So if you're influenced by this and this concept of skepticism, you need to read David Hume. Or if you know people who are influenced by skepticism, you need to read David Hume. He's a hard empiricist. He's going to say in many respects, we can't know reality and concept of causality in and of themselves, and rather we need to be skeptical of them. I know that's a very superficial overview, but again, this is to give you books, not content. Again, let's keep going here. Now, probably the most influential modern philosopher that you need to be reading is Immanuel Kant. In fact, it has been said over and over and over again that more people have been influenced today by Immanuel Kant, unfortunately, than Jesus Christ. And the reason for that is because Immanuel Kant is the father of modern agnosticism. His book, The Critique of Pure Reason, and his ethics book, The Critique of Practical Reason, really were the turning points in the history of philosophy. Here's a few reasons why. The Critique of Pure Reason is picking up this whole debate between rationalism and empiricism, and he's trying to answer the question, what is the source and content of knowledge? How does knowledge function? So you're going to have these figures that are going to say it comes before experience, it comes a priori, rationalist. You're going to have people that are going to say it comes after experience, and it comes a posteriori, the empiricists, and they're going to start asking questions like, how does this work with propositional knowledge? We're going to get to this very quickly. Analytic statements, all bachelors are unmarried men, predicates contained in the subject. Synthetic statements, all bachelors are unmarried men who wear red shirts, the predicates not contained in the subject. And what he's going to do is he's going to say that we're going to have synthetic a priori knowledge, which is another way of saying that we're going to have new information that's going to be given to us, but it's going to come a priori. That's fuzzy, unclear, doesn't make sense. You wonder why? Well, that's why you need to read Immanuel Kant, because that is what agnosticism is. Now, here's one of the funny things is that a lot of people will say, I am an agnostic. I know what agnosticism is, and I buy into the theory of agnosticism. And then I ask them very clearly, okay, explain the concept of synthetic a priori knowledge, and you just get cricket. Kind of hear this. And you realize very quickly they don't know what they're talking about. So if you want to claim to be an agnostic, you want to follow in that tradition, you need to read Immanuel Kant. So let's keep going here. The next book that I would recommend that you read would be Hegel. Hegel is going to give us this whole idea of a dialectical method. You have a thesis and an antithesis. You have these different things that are going to war with one another, but it's not just a horizontal issue. It's achieving vertical ends. And we see this all the time, this concept of the Hegelian dialectic. And I know some people think, oh, Hegel didn't say this. Well, he has a whole book on the dialectic. It's been recognized throughout various major philosophers that Hegel was, in many respects, the key figure of the dialectic. And you need to read it because the dialectic, the way that reality functions and how knowledge functions and the end goal of the dialectic are axiomatic to modern and contemporary philosophy. In particular, what you're going to see is that you're going to see Nietzsche picked up on that. You're going to see that Marx picked up on that. You're going to see the concept of the dialectic working its way out in modern and contemporary theology, not just philosophy, ethics, and so much more. In particular, I would tell you that the concept of the dialectic might very well be, aside from agnosticism, the most influential driving sort of mode or tactic or whatever phrase you want to use in modern philosophy. So you need to read Hegel's issues on the philosophy of history. You need to read his book on philosophy of right. You need to see how the dialectic actually works. That brings us to another one. You need to read Nietzsche. You need to see how this is going to work within these issues of atheistic philosophy, how Hegel's philosophy is axiomatic to figures like Nietzsche and Marx and other figures. Now, this is a quick series. I want this to be a quick video. Brings us to our next one and our final one here. Namely, you need to read Karl Marx. And a lot of people ask themselves, why do you need to read Karl Marx? Isn't he just dealing with economics? Oh, no. No. Marx is the key figure who's going to talk about how the dialectic works in society. It's a philosophy of reality and how the dialectic functions with all of the different people groups that are living in society today. So let's summarize this very quickly. Why should you read Marx? Well, Marx is the key figure, him and Hegel and others, for some of the contemporary philosophies that we see today, like critical race theory or the social justice movement or any of these other movements that you see dominating postmodern philosophy and so much more. Namely, I'm not saying that all postmodernists are Marxists, but I'm saying that dialectic and idealistic philosophy in that regard are driving many of these. Now, we could give a whole slew of postmodern philosophers, but I think if you read these key figures, you're going to have a good working understanding of the history of philosophy. Stick with me. One more thing here. There are major players and there are minor players. There are primary figures and there are secondary figures. There's primary literature and there's secondary literature. Noticing a trend here? Here's what I want you to see. The primary figures are the primary figures for a primary reason. Namely, they shaped the debate. What you need to do is focus on the key figures and the key debates and the key movement. Because if you get caught up reading every secondary source, every secondary thing, you're going to miss the major conversation. And if you're trying to dive into this topic because you want to be conversant on this issue, you need to deal with the key figures, not the secondary sources. However, stick with me. One more thing here. Namely, as our sponsor would say, oh wait, we don't have a sponsor. Nobody sponsors this channel. Why? Because you need to like and subscribe to this channel. Please do us all a favor. I would appreciate it. The audience would appreciate it. And it lets me know how to serve you best. Thank you.
10,000 years will give you such a prick in the neck.